know that they're not the only person that's dealing with it, but also that you can feel okay to talk about things that are going on. So I'm really grateful that you created this space and platform and series so that we can start to talk about these difficult topics.
Hi, I'm Shalene.
Hi,
AKA Boss Lady.
Right, what he said. I just wanted to find out from you if anyone has questions, like can they put it privately and then I'll let you know, or I can read it out just in case, you know, some people would want to ask questions and they don't want their name, they don't want to be called out in the room.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So again, we want to continue to make this a safe space. So I think that's great that if someone does have a question, if it's just a general knowledge, they can put it for everyone to see if they're comfortable. But if it's something a little bit more personal and they want to stay anonymous, that they can direct it to you if they feel comfortable to. And then, like you said, just have you bring the question to my attention because we want them to feel safe enough to talk about it. Absolutely.
Also, with this Zoom setup, they can send you a direct message.
Yes.
As well. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they can. And so I'll give a little background just to who I am so people can say, well, who is this lady we're going to give our information to and is talking? So I am a licensed mental health clinician. I got my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling back in 2016. And prior to becoming a mental health professional, I always worked around where I did case management and worked around communities volunteering, doing psychology and mentoring under other psychologists. And I worked with the fire department for many, many years as a paramedic. So when we talk about even domestic violence or just seeing any type of, also known, you'll hear me change with say intimate partner violence and domestic violence, just synonymous with one another, that this is something that's been around for a very, very long time that I've been exposed to in many different ways. So fast forward, I got my master's degree in 2016, transitioned in the fire department working as a clinician for full time, and then started my own private practice working with the general public just because I feel that there's a need, and currently in my first year of my doctoral studies for clinical psychology. So I like to consider myself to be a vast resource for people. So again, any questions is always welcome in whatever platform they decide to send it in. But I really just feel that this is something that really just needed to be discussed and talked for a very, very long time. Sorry. Thank you. So I just wanted to start off just with talking about, since we're going to talk about domestic violence, and you know, any questions, feel free to jump in and stop me at any time. But you know, just really understanding, you know, what is domestic violence? We hear about it and we throw it around and say, here when people are talking about it, we know that we had the recent incident which brought about this whole conversation of what it is. And domestic violence just really means that it's a form of any type of physical injury, any type of sexual assault, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, again, emotional abuse as well too. I think sometimes we leave that out of the realm of what can contribute to what just domestic violence or any type of emotional assault or violence can be. And when we're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about it more so within the realms of a relationship, you know, between two people, whether they're married or not married. Interestingly enough, we know that when we're talking about domestic violence on a broader spectrum, which will connect to some of the topics and things that I talk about later on, is how it connects to the family dynamic. We can see traits of domestic violence in our own household, depending on your culture, your race, your background, your ethnicity, and just from your child's upbringing and rearing, that sometimes this can just be so integrated into our culture that we really don't see it anything else other than being disciplined. But if we looked really at what the definition is, and again, continuing to research, whether you're looking, whether you continue to look through the National Domestic Violence Hotline, or you're looking on the National Institute of Mental Health, when we look at what it is textbook-wise, there's a lot of domestic violence that spans even outside of intimate relationships. So that's why you have this synonymous category of domestic violence along with intimate partner violence, because it allows you to specify when there is violence that is taking place in a relationship. And so we also know that with domestic violence, we look at the individual, we look at the person, we say, oh, they're angry, they don't know how to control their temper, you know, they've been taught this way, you know, they don't, as in my family say, they don't have any brought up see. My family's from Barbados, so, you know, they don't have no brought up see or mannerism, but, you know, we have to look at the dynamic of where did it come from. And when we're talking about the ability of people to be able to speak up, whether they're the victim or the abuser of being in that dynamic, it's a hard plight for either one to take that face and take that stand and speak up, right? So if I am the abuser, I am establishing a sense of power or control. My ability to remain in control for whatever reason, and there's a slew of different reasons why people may exhibit these forms of control, but I want to keep control in a relationship for my own safety, right? Maybe I'm fearful of things, you know, maybe from my cultural upbringing or childhood experiences, things that I was exposed to. I believe that this is the way to be and that it's okay. And I mimic behaviors, patterns, relationships that I've seen in my childhood, now in my adult relationship and self, right? If I'm on the other end of that spectrum where I am on the receiving end and I am the person that is the victim of the abuse, those same factors can also roll into maybe why the person may stay, but also because they feel that they don't have an out. Usually when it gets to the point of physical violence in a relationship, they've usually been isolated from their family, from their friends. They don't feel they have a safe space or support system where they can talk about it. And they're in this place of entrapment where all they know is just to stay in this realm, even though they have the continuous want to escape, but there's a lot of fear that comes with it. Or maybe if we take it back to even the cultural context, maybe this is what they saw growing up. Maybe this is what they believe is love. And as odd as that may seem, there's many clients that I've worked with that says, well, this is what I know love is to be. I know that they love me and they didn't mean me any harm. So therefore, if I leave, then I abandon them. And somehow they come into this place where they start to reverse the logic, because in their mind, staying in the relationship helps that person that they're with, even though they're being abused, because they don't want to abandon them. They don't want to cause them harm. They don't want to make them feel alone, even though they're alone in the relationship. So there's a lot of different moving parts when we're talking about what can constitute to being in an abusive relationship, whether it's intimate partner violence or just domestic violence. And again, they're synonymous with the two, but domestic can be brought in the context to include all types of family members, whether it's grandparents, children's, your parents themselves, or even siblings, right? So we want to make sure that we understand that no matter where the source is coming from, that the acts are still the same. And so when we're looking at I know, Spice, when we were first talking about even putting this together, when we were talking about how do we connect domestic violence or intimate partner violence to our Caribbean culture and our Caribbean communities to where we can make it a safe space, one of the first things is that we have to look at how much of our heritage, how much of our culture, how much of our ancestry has allowed us to normalize abuse in any form, right? When we think about the way that, you know, and a lot of it too, and again, both my parents are from the Caribbean, both of them are from Barbados. So I grew up in a very strong, stern, strict, to be seen, not heard, follow my rules. If you don't, the whole family's coming down on you type of environment. And I also grew up in a single household with just my mom, right? So that dynamic also played a different role, because I didn't witness or see any type of physical abuse between like my mom or my dad. But what I did learn was to always fight back. I was taught in order to be strong, you must always fight back. And that can sometimes start to create the dynamic of how we start to perceive and how we bring that into our relationships. If I am taught that the way that you're to get your point across, the way that you're to, and this is for whether you're a boy or a girl growing up in a single household. If you're taught this way, you're going to carry this over into your adult self and your adult relationships. So it's important that we start to take a look back even at our own upbringing and our own understanding of what we were exposed to. And a lot of times we don't do that. We just normalize it and we continue to move forward with, well, this is just the way it is. My parents did it this way. My grandparents did it this way. So there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing until sometimes it really hit home, right? Sorry, because I just saw a question come up that was actually pretty interesting. What's the difference between emotional and mental? Can you just be a little bit more specific about that? And I'll be more than happy to, are you talking about just the well-being? Just let me know and I'll definitely tie it in as well too.
In terms of, let's talk about what we've been seeing on social media. Would you say it was a mental abuse? Was it a emotional abuse, or could it all tie into just one type of abuse that she was feeling all? Because to me, there is a difference between mental and emotional.
Yes.
And then there's a different, and as well as physical.
Absolutely. So usually when we see the trajectory of abuse that happens, it usually starts off with maybe verbal or emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and then it can transcend into physical abuse, right? Sometimes it can just go straight into physical. But if we even think about the physical abuse, that's going to tie in every single aspect you just talked about, right? It's going to tie it all in. Now, there is definitely a difference between emotional well-being and mental well-being. It's something that I talk about all the time, even within my practice and clients, because mentally I need to be able to process. When I'm talking about the ability to process my thoughts, and really kind of be able to separate the thoughts from the feelings in that moment, but process what is happening, what is going on, what I'm involved in, and to be able to stay in what we call the rational thought process. That's more of the being able to stay in a mental capacity or a mental well-being. When I'm looking at the emotional well-being, I'm looking at the ability to regulate my emotions. I'm looking for the ability to find a balance between the two and not only operate out of my emotional self. When I operate out of my emotional self, the likelihood for me to maybe over process or over analyze can be more higher because I'm not in a more rational, calm, balanced place of being. So when we're talking about being the difference between the mental and emotional, we want to find a balance between the two of them, because when they're equally balanced or balanced in a way to where it can produce positive production, whether in our relationships, in ourselves, in our behaviors, we want to make sure that we're in a positive production of continuingly to be in a positive space, a safe space. So when it comes to, again, coming back now to social media, when we're talking about this, talking about what we're seeing, I really do believe that at this point, when you see the way how things are unfolding, we know that there's a lot of emotional processes that are going on. Reactions come from emotions, right? Not to say that we can't also do it in our logical brain, as they would say, or our mental well-being. But when we have those quick responses, reactions, usually we're seeing it more from the emotional stance, and it's hard to regulate it if you're not even aware that you're operating in that position. A lot of times when we're reacting and responding, we're just going with our feelings. We're going with what it is that in that moment. So if I'm angry, I'm reacting out of that anger, right? But I don't stop to say, well, what about this moment is causing me to feel angry? because anger usually isn't the primary reason why someone is reacting out of something. It's usually a deeper feeling, whether they're hurt, whether they're disappointed, whether, you know, they're in pain. There's an underlying factor. So I think that to go back to your question, to answer it, that what we're seeing on the social media platform, and I always say to even my clients, if you're upset, step away from social media, because that may not be the best place for you to kind of release your anger or frustration. But a lot of times it's usually a deterioration in a sense of just where they're at emotionally, and it's just continuing to evolve in a descending manner. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Just let me know and then I'll continue.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay. So also one thing I was going to also share about Caribbean communities. So I was talking a little bit about, and even to connect to the point that you made, what we're seeing in social media, right? Hurt people hurt people. That's one of my main things that I say. We don't know where that hurt may come from. We don't know why it's there. We don't know maybe what the intent is, but what we can say is that hurt people can hurt people. And a lot of it is because they don't understand where they themselves are operating from. They may not understand how damaged they themselves may be. They may not recognize the pain that they're in. And when it finally comes out, it comes out in a negative way. So unfortunately, in this circumstance, what we're seeing is actually not uncommon. And that's what honestly is the sad part about it. There's many cases I can say that I've been with where there has been this exposure. It's one of also whether who released it or not, but usually if there is an abuser that's releasing information that can be you know, of pornographic material or to extort someone, that is still a way of trying to exhibit control. And when we talk about that control, it falls into this power and control wheel, which lists all of the different reasons why someone is trying to control the individual. Again, whether they themselves might fear something may expose them, whether they themselves is going to make them feel alone, but it's wrong, right? No one has a right to violate anyone's privacy, no matter what the circumstances are. No one has a right to say it's okay that if I'm upset that I can hit someone else or degrade them to the point where it is emotionally abusive. No one has that right and to do so, but people feel that this can be normalized in their relationships. Why? Because maybe it's part of their past. Maybe it's part of what they've seen. Maybe it's part of what they've come to know. I've had young men that I've worked with the court systems come to me, and when I ask them why would they find themselves in the circumstance of being an abuser or what led them to it, they would say to me, well, this is what I was taught. And when I would ask them, well, who taught you that? Where did you learn that this is okay? And they either says, well, the streets or my home. So in the streets I remember one case I had a young man of Caribbean descent actually said to me, you know, where I grew, you know, he grew up in a Caribbean community as well. So he said, well, where I grew up, you know, I remember my first relationship, I was head over heels in love with my, like, let's say 14-year-old girlfriend. And I was doing things the way that I saw my parents do, which is, you know, carry books or be nice. And when his older generational friends saw him, they actually degraded him and made him feel that he was wrong and told him that that's not how a man is supposed to be. A man is supposed to put a woman in check, and you're not supposed to act this way. And for a very, very long time of his life, because he was also now trying to prove himself to these group of friends, for him, it became a normalized way of being in his relationships, that he thought that this was okay. until finally he ended up in jail, and now he was getting a different look at things. But when you have so many years of this being a habitual practice, it's, unless they decide to seek the help that they need and enter into a domestic abuse program and learn how to undo a lot of the wrong that they have, they're never going to change because it hasn't resonated with them yet. And a lot of the changes has to come from within the person. And that becomes the hardest switch to bring to the forefront.
I believe we have a question.
Yes.
I'll ask them to unmute.
So from the perspective of hurt people,
Yes.
I'm not saying I'm a victim, but as a victim in a situation, what would you say would be the right way to go about breaking the cycle and getting the healing, not only for yourself, but for the person doing the abusing? Like, where's that middle ground where the change can start to happen? Thank
you. Well, so one, it comes from that inner strength, right? I think that's a huge, huge, huge thing that the person have to start to work on, because a lot of it comes out of fear. And majority of the times when I'm working with women who are not sure how to leave abusive relationships is because they've been so isolated. And when I mean isolated, not just from being from their friends or family and visiting, but like access to social media, access to phones, or if they have to be watched, or they have a time that they don't have the resources in order to strengthen themselves. And so one of the first things is, and I'm definitely going to share this again at the end, is that anyone who finds themselves in an abusive relationship, or feel that they might be in an abusive relationship, even if it's not severe in your mind, it may not be severe. Any form of abuse is just an abuse, right? That there are resources. A national domestic violence hotline. There's actually safe spaces. And the biggest issue that I see sometimes for whether it's women or men, because we do have both that are victims of abuse, is that they have that inability to leave and not feel guilty. And whatever that emotional connection is or attachment is keeps them in the relationship. But they have to first allow themselves to mentally accept the fact that it is not okay where they are. It becomes a mental acceptance as well as an emotional acceptance in order to move forward, because they're either so conditioned, or maybe because they feel so entrapped or isolated, or they've been taught or conditioned, no one's ever going to want you, no one's ever going to love you. There's so many things that they can be told to stay in there. But the very, very first step is knowing where you can go for help, and also being able to mentally and emotionally give yourself that strength in order to start to take those steps. Safe houses are available for men and women that are in abusive relationships, where they can get put into housing, and their information wouldn't be revealed, and they will be able to be connected with a lot of different resources to help them get back on their feet. And especially with financial gain. A lot of the reasons too, where we also see whether it's an emotional abuse, mental abuse, it inclusive of physical abuse, is there's usually a financial power, right? Where they may not have access to resources because that person may fear they may leave if they have access to money or have access to credit cards. So they may control all of the money so they can't leave. But knowing that there are resources, that there are places that they can go, there's support groups. Even if you don't leave right away, some women may start with finding support groups even in their churches, in their neighborhood. With COVID, there's a lot online, but just being able to allow yourself to start to reconnect. And the reconnection becomes one of the more important pieces to the puzzle of the victims starting to gain strength in themselves to start to find that safety that they need.
Okay, thank you. So for people outside, am I allowed to ask another question?
Oh, Yes, go ahead.
For people outside of the victim, then are there, and if there are, what are some signs that people can look at to pick up that their friend or whoever might be in an abusive situation?
Yeah, so definitely behavior becomes one of the first. And when we see our family members, loved ones, close girlfriends, friends, all of a sudden their pattern change once they enter into a relationship, whether it's lessening of phone calls, lessening of coming out, always having an excuse, whether it comes around to family events, social events, that's trying to make that connection and being on the outside in when they're in the relationship so deep where they've been isolated can be hard to connect. And usually it's really about trying to make that connection when you can. If you know, pointing out what you notice is the difference, because when people are trying to exit a relationship that's abusive, again, that struggle for them to leave is, I even saw somebody put in here, like it can take up to 6 times for someone to leave. And that's accurate, sometimes even more, you know, because they're so fearful. And so a lot of it is because they don't have anyone that can support them. So if you have someone that you know that is in an abusive relationship and you're not able to communicate, when you do get to communicate with them, definitely pointing out the differences, not in a badgering way, not in a point your finger way, like I told you this person is bad, but saying, hey, listen, you know, I noticed that there's been a lot of changes recently. You know, you're not coming out, you know, you're not, you know, you're not making phone calls, and that's very different. I just want to make sure that you're okay, right? And because you have to, it's kind of like trying to make an emotional connection with them that they're so afraid to make, because if they've been told that they need to be isolated from everyone else, they're not going to want to connect with you. So just constantly being a resource for them. Hey, you know, you can call me anytime. I'm very worried about you. You know, I even sometimes I even tell people, if you feel that this is what's going on to someone, and again, this is based on the dynamic of the relationship that you have with them, to call it out. Hey, listen, you know, since you've been in this relationship, I noticed that you've been different, right? Because we don't want to say, listen, I think that this is going on, because they might get defensive. And they might go in protection mode. But if you kind of just point out the differences in the behavior that you're noticing, hey, you know, I noticed we used to go out every Sunday for lunch, and now I notice that, you know, it's kind of hard to get you on the phone, you know, I just wanted to know what's going on. And just really trying to connect with them, because they have to get to a space where they can trust you to say, hey, you know, I may have a friend that is going through something, or they may finally say, hey, listen, the reason why I haven't been contacting you is because things are a little rough at home. And you hear that a lot all the time, but that can be the key opening to kind of connecting with them, to give them the resources they need. You're welcome. Any other questions? I just want to make sure, because I see.
I didn't see any, but I know
Okay.
Kimbella was saying that, you know, she had went through a situation as well, and, you know, even while she was pregnant, but she got out.
That she was, oh, well, that she was able to get out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for sharing first and foremost. I'm glad that you're in a safe space. And it's hard. It's hard. The psychological warfare that domestic violence places on an individual is terrifying. I can only imagine what that can feel like or be like, wanting to leave but not being able to leave, wanting to leave but being fearful to leave, you know, fearing that there's repercussions or consequences. And even so, if you are able to leave, how fearful that might be now starting over, right? Especially if they've been in a relationship for a very, very, very long time. And so we have to make sure that if you yourself are in a relationship that does constitute of domestic violence, or you know someone that are, that again, that ability to say that it's going to be okay if I leave, which is easier said than done, is actually a place of affirmation that needs to start from within. It's not easy leaving or exiting any type of violent relationship, even if it's just not physical, but even emotionally abusive, which there are a lot of relationships that are just emotionally abusive and may not be physically abusive as well.
But if you can,
Does someone have somebody saying something? Just
sorry, it's me. My camera's off on mute. My mom is like commenting in between. No, it is that. I definitely agree with you. It is something that, I had a lot of back and forth. I was pregnant when it first started. I had just recently moved into our house. The house was in my name. I just felt like I was stuck. I literally felt like I was stuck, and it continued to happen until I finally said, I can't take it. I can't take this anymore. I'm gonna, do whatever I have to do. If I have to lose my house, whatever it is, I'm not gonna be subject to this anymore. It went from physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, and it's still 15 years later, sad, it still continues. It still is there. If they can't touch you physically, they're going to try to diminish you any which way they can.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for sharing just your story, because I'm sure sometimes even someone else who sees or hear your story and your ability to lead, that can help them. But you're right, it doesn't, because the one thing I can say is that we can heal from our physical wounds, but our mental and emotional wounds, that last a very, very long time. It takes a lot of healing. But one of the key things that you did say was, I finally got to that point where I just couldn't take it anymore. Right? So I finally decided to leave, however that exit strategy may be. And for a lot of people that may be in relationships, and bringing it back even to our community, we look at that the constant back and forth, the constant arguing, the constant, disagreements or fights that we may see in our own households. Again, a part of it is normalized, but then what happens when it gets to that point where now it's impacting me, it's isolating me, it's keeping me from my loved ones, it's making me, and that's one word that we hear all the time, just feeling stuck. I feel stuck, right? And how do you become unstuck?
Correct.
And if I was a person who was just sitting here, never had no degrees or insight, I wouldn't know myself how to do that either, right? And so a lot of it just comes from where my threshold is. When we see women finally get that like to go bag and they finally leave, or they just leave with anything, it's because they're at a point where they are so broken that they can no longer take any more backlash.
You lose
right?
Mm-hmm.
You lose yourself. One of the things that I remember reading not too long ago, I was looking also on the Pan American African American Caribbean website, was that they were talking about one of the things that we see that develops from domestic violence, male or female, are the development of mental health issues, right? Anxiety, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and sadly enough, suicide, suicidal ideations, and suicidal attempts. And when you think about the continuous exposure, when we're talking about being in an emotionally, mentally, or physically abusive relationship, that is the pot to develop every last one of those symptoms. I'm anxious and fearful to leave. I'm sad because of the relationship that I'm in. I'm hurt and I'm harmed because of the trauma that I'm exposed to, right? So if I'm stuck in this wheelbarrow that just constantly keeps going around of nothing but negative emotions, the likelihood and the normalcy to feel stuck is heightened. It's definitely heightened. And so being able to understand and bring these conversations to the forefront becomes very, very important, because we need to tell our young men and our young women that it's okay that to speak up and to connect and try to find the resources, that you're not alone. That you're not alone when you're in a situation, even though you may feel like you're alone, that you're actually not alone. And just know, even if it's not the ability to connect, I always tell people, go to a bookstore. They have so many resources, even in bookstores, that if you wanted to learn about safe spaces and all of the other things that can help you to start to exit a relationship, that even if you stood in Barnes and Noble and just read the book there, if you were able to, that becomes important to learn strategies of how to exit the relationship.
There's one general question in the room.
Okay.
Are there safe spaces for men to communicate about abuse, domestic violence? It may not be encouraged or normalized. So
Oh, that's such a good question.
For men.
Oh, absolutely. First, same thing will go with the National Domestic Hotline. They have all the virtual resources and spaces that you can use for men and women. And I love that question because there's a lot of domestic violence that happens in the community, even in our Caribbean community, towards men. And when we think about domestic violence, one of our first things that we go to is are women that are being abused, but men are also being abused as well too. So you can definitely go to the National Domestic Hotline. If you go on there, I actually have the telephone number, so I guess we can put it in the chat. If you don't mind, I'll just say it and we can put it in the chat. So that number is 1-800-799-7233, and that spells safe. And there you can call and you can text, and it's available 24/7. And they can actually give you resources, have networking events, that connections that you can make for men. There's safe houses for men as well as women. So we have to look at the fact that it's not just leverage to just women, because we do know that both men and women are in a position that they can experience domestic violence and abuse.
I just wanted to share something. I was in mentally and emotionally abusive relationship for, I want to say, 3 years. And it was just, my kids were affected by it. And then my dad passed. And then I was just like, okay, I've had enough. Because it was long distance too. And then, one person saying that you're doing something because that person is the one who's insecure about a relationship. And they're the ones that is actually doing the cheating, the lying, and it was just it was too much. And my kids were just so pissed. My kids had to tell me, like, you're on the phone all day, all night. We don't get to talk to you privately. Like, you have to get off the phone so I can talk to you. It was sad. And then I realized it, and I called and I was just like, you know what, this is over. And I hung my phone up. And that person called my mother to ask them, what is going on with her? Why she broke up with me? I'm done. What more do you want from me? I can't give you any more of myself because I don't have the energy for you anymore. I just want to.
Oh, absolutely.
To me, it felt mental and emotional.
Yeah.
That's why I had to ask, what's the difference?
Well, one again as well. Thank you for sharing your story and for sharing that. They go hand in hand. But again, our mental well-being would say, no, this isn't right. We're not taking this anymore, right? Emotionally, we can be there too. But again, if we don't get in sync with the two of them, it's very difficult. That's that psychological warfare that we play within ourselves, right? I love this person, but this person is hurting me, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally. But I love this person. This person says they love me. And let's face it, a lot of times the abuser know exactly what it is to say to get you to come back, right? They know what to say. They know they'll apologize. They'll never do it again. They'll say they're wrong. But it's a constant revolution of this cycle all the time. And so, as I said when we first started, that inner strength of being able to be mindful and to be aware and say, no, I hear your apology, but this isn't right. You don't have a right to mentally abuse me. You don't have a right to hurt me and then think when you come back to say, I'm sorry, that it's okay. But we have to be willing to step out of that wheel. We have to be willing for whatever the reason is. And again, just like your story and Kim Bella, is that we have to be able to say, I've had enough. I deserve more. But when we think about people, in men or women in relationships that are abusive, they also have developed low self-esteem. And these may be people who never had low self-esteem before, but through entering the relationship and constantly being beat down mentally, emotionally, and physically, their self-esteem, their self-worth, their self-value starts to diminish in the relationship. And it makes it even harder for them to pull themselves up. So, you know, when we talk about what is that limit, I hear people all the time, well, when would I know? How do I know? And I always tell people, it's something in you that will finally say, I can't do this anymore. I won't do this anymore. And maybe they'll make that phone call that they've been, you know, I work also with people that, I used to work also with the substance abuse population. And I always used to tell them that one of the hardest things for people to do when they're in a crisis is to pick up the phone or just to ask for help. It is the hardest thing to do in that moment because there's so much fear attached to that request of help, because they want to take control, but they can't take control. And it's, how do I make this change? How do I make things better? Especially if there's children involved. How do I make this better? Another thing that I hear with people who have children in relationships that are abusive is, you know, well, I'll stay for my kids. My kids need both of their parents. You know, I'll sacrifice. You know, again, bringing it back to maybe our heritage, our culture. This is what my parents did. They made it work, right? No relationship is perfect. We're going to fight. We're going to argue, which is true, but it should not be at the extent to where it's physically abusing you or mentally abusing you or emotionally abusing you. And so being able to recognize, another thing is, do you even recognize when you're in an emotionally abusive relationship? Because if you can't realize or recognize that you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, the likelihood for it to keep on progressing is high. So being able to do, you know, questionnaires that are available, again, national hotline, the domestic hotline, you can look on their website, domestic violence hotline, you can look on their website. They have tons of resources. They have questionnaires. They have, you know, articles that you can read just so you can learn. Even Cosmopolitan magazines, there's so many different magazines, even on our PAHO.org, their website. There's also resources, articles that you can use to see what are the symptoms of an abusive relationship. Because am I able to recognize whether I'm in one or not? That is one of the key things. The next thing I always ask people all the time that I work with or have conversations with is, do you even know what it means to be in a healthy relationship? Because if I don't know what it means to be in a healthy relationship or have a healthy relationship, then the likelihood of me developing one is not going to be that great, right? If I grew up in what we may deem a dysfunctional household, right, where constantly there's, and again, when I think about this, when I read it in textbook, I'm like, well, you know, that was my household. Screaming, yelling, lashes, we got all of that. Like, I came from a Caribbean household, and this was normalized for me, right? And so when I take things that I gained from my childhood into my adult relationships, I have to be careful of what it is that I'm carrying over. So if I grew up in a two-family household where maybe physical abuse was prominent, whether it was because of a mental health disorder or maybe substance abuse, and that's another big thing in our community. A lot of times when we see physical abuse, they'll say, oh, you know, they were just drinking, you know, they didn't mean it, they weren't sober. A lot of times we see substance abuse play a very, very big role in domestic violence.
Right. There was a comment made saying that we have to acknowledge that men that abused have been abused, and that, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I read it correctly.
Sure.
It's important to acknowledge that men that abuse have been abused. In the person who wrote the message, they saying, in my experience, the men and women were victims themselves. So breaking the cycle for the abuser is a step process. So
absolutely,
would you consider, you know, drugs to be, you know, part of that mentality that they have? Does it cause certain, you know, this type of behavior? There are a few questions in the chat, so I guess
it's okay. Yeah. So to answer the latter part, yes and no. Right. Okay. A lot of times, well, let me go back to even that first part of that question. So going back to hurt people, right? So a lot of times when we see someone that is deemed an abuser, yes, they themselves have been abused, whether it was in another relationship, whether it was in their childhood, whether there was sexual abuse or assault, and they project and take that out in their relationships, again, to deem that control. It's really the ability to be in control. When we see substance come into the play, alcohol or any other type of recreational substances, is because they're trying to cope, right? Or they've learned to cope this way, that this is now part of their normative behavior, or again, maybe based on culture, that this is just part of their norm. And it can exacerbate different types of moods, different types of personality development. Some people can get very angry, agitated. Some people can get very depressed. It can potentiate, when you throw substance of any sort into any situation, there is the likelihood for there to be, of course, there's impairment, but the likelihood for there to be damage, trauma, you know, behaviors that even the person may not even remember that they've done, because they may have blacked out or been in a different state of mind. So when you have this altered state of being because of a substance, there's always a higher likelihood for aggressive behavior, and that definitely can play a part into it.
There's also another question. So if we know it's wrong, why don't we do better? Why and how have we allowed normalizing abuse in a relationship?
A lot of times people don't even realize that they have normalized something, because it's usually coming from what they have been exposed. It's this continuous cycle until we're able to pinpoint and recognize that something else needs to be done, right? So again, normalize, you know, we use that word in therapy a lot. We try to normalize things, or we talk about how things have been normalized. And it doesn't mean that it's good. In order for us to do better, it starts with platforms like this. Being able to have these conversations in an open forum, being able to bring the, you know, light to mental health illnesses that are within our Caribbean community, and just in general. To have the conversations in a safe space, to educate people to understand how much of an impact different situations, experiences, traumas can impact us in our day-to-day life. And even if that day-to-day impact isn't on our life specifically, but if it's a family member or a close friend that we care about, and we see them struggling, or we see them in a negative space, that does impact us. So we have to be willing to have the conversations. We have to be willing to talk about the things that aren't easy to talk about, and be able to share the knowledge that we gain with others, so we can continue to expand and make a change in what it is we believe should be normalized. We have to first understand what it means to be in a healthy relationship. We have to understand what it means to be a partner, right? Do I know what that means to even be a partner? And when I ask people those two questions, I always say, don't tell me about it from an external factor. Tell it to me from an internal factor, meaning how do you show up in your relationships? Can you say the way you show up in your relationship allows for growth, development, and expansion? Because we're going to attract what we put out, right? And not in a way to harm us, but talking about energies, right? So I want to make sure that the energy that I'm able to give off, if you want to say, that I am saying that I am in this space of being. I understand what it means to be in a positive, healthy relationship. So a lot of people say, well, what does that mean to be in a positive, healthy relationship? Well, that means that I'm able to that I'm able to lay down the foundations. I'm able to develop trust. I'm able to be mindful. I'm able to have effective communication. I'm able to develop my relationships, not only in my intimate relationship, but to be able to see if there's any extreme boundaries that are being formed and being able to interject if that is developing and recognizing it when it's happening and being able to take that step out. A lot of times when people are recognizing they're so far in that that's also where part of the struggle comes around with trying to exit and leave a toxic or unhealthy relationship.
Okay, I have a question, and then I do have someone who would like to, speak about something that they've also been through.
Absolutely.
I know this was supposed to end at 8, but it's a little more. So
it's okay.
Fine. Okay, good. All right. Just making sure. All right. Go ahead. And then I'll get to Jody Covington is going to be the one who'll talk after. And then I had a question in the chat as well.
Okay.
So I'm a root person, right? And I feel like something really important to take into consideration when thinking about solutions is that deep rooted issue that could possibly be a momentum, or I don't know what the proper word I'm looking for is. So if we think back culturally to primarily Black people, when we are growing up, discipline, I think, is maybe one of our first experiences with abuse. What is that fine line between disciplining a child physically and abusing a child physically? And how can we, if that's what we choose to use as a disciplinary measure, how can we make sure that that line is not blurred and it's not crossed to cause these major issues down the road?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great question. And so when I talk about even I like that you put it in expansive, just Black people in the community, but even when I was talking about in our culture, that we learned that disciplining is just a part of how we are raised, right? That this is how you correct the wrong. Remember also that when we're talking about what domestic violence is, like I said in the very beginning, is that ability for someone to have serious physical injury, serious mental, emotional injury that is displaced onto the individual, whether it's the child, even in that sense, from another family member, no matter who that family member is. And that ability to define the line really comes from that ability to be aware of what is going on, right? So that ability to recognize that, okay, so the way I was disciplined, that may have not been one of the best ways to go, because we look at the attachments and then we look at the breakdown of attachments that happen, right, from disciplining. And we know that there are going to be different styles of disciplining, especially when we're talking about in our Western culture versus our Caribbean culture or European culture. There's always different ways of disciplining, but that line really comes from being able to not doing things in excess, right? So we're looking at that sense. If you look even here in the US, they say that I had a case one time where it was with CPS involved, and they were saying, oh, no, we're not saying that you can't discipline them, but if you do, you got to like open hand and smack them on the bottom. You can't close fist. And in my head, I was like, whoa, well then my whole family probably should have had a case, because I got a switch, a broom, anything you think of growing up, because that's just how my parents were raised. But looking forward, at it and saying, well, I want to teach my child or teach the child what to do in a different way. So creating an alternative that can still convey the same message without creating the physical harm. And that really requires that ability for someone to say that, you know what, I'm not going to continue this way and style of disciplining because I realize the amount of emotional harm, the emotional damage that it's done to me as a person, furthermore, to inflict that on my child. Because when we inflict that on our younger generation, we're teaching them to do the same thing. So we have to be able to create a different narrative. We have to be able to create a different way of understanding how to still get that point across without having to be excessive in the way that we're disciplining.
All right, I have a question, and then Jody will come on. The question was, are men comfortable speaking to other men or holds any accountable conversation if there are toxic behaviors they see among another male? So I know that we do have some men in the room, and we would love to hear from some of them if they want to talk, but this was a question that was asked, in the chat.
So if they do, sometimes it may be in private. And again, or it may be done in the exact opposite, right? Where if they're in a circle of friends where maybe that is, again, that worm of the norm, they may talk about it because they're comfortable talking about it. But when they're broached with something that's different other than what they're accustomed to, then it may become uncomfortable and they may get defensive in it. There are platforms for, and again, if there are any men in the chat that would like to also talk about their experience if they have it, but there are rooms or platforms that are available that even if you don't feel comfortable going to maybe your friends or your family members to talk about things like that, that you can have support groups. There are support groups for men, whether they're the victim or abusers, that they can utilize in order to learn more about either their behaviors or behaviors that they themselves are now questioning that they use as their style of exhibiting control in their relationships. There are actual support groups for men that are available, everything being virtual, but there are platforms that are available. How comfortable they are talking amongst themselves, I can't really say because I wouldn't know from a male's perspective, but we always try to make it safe enough to know that it's hard even for men to speak up if they are victims of abuse. Let's just switch the roles for a second. When I worked out on the streets on ambulance, I used to come across many men that were in abusive relationships, and I would ask them if they would want to file a police report, and they would shy away from it because they were embarrassed or they felt shame or they felt guilt to even talk about it. So it's really sometimes a lot of underreporting that can happen, but again, being able to let them know, men and women, but talking to the men, that it is okay to speak up because it's not right for anyone to be in an abusive relationship.
All right, so we have Jody Covington. She's somewhere on your screen. And I'll let her introduce herself and, give a little background about herself, and then she can speak on some of the things that she wants.
Hi, so my name is Jody Covington. I just wanted to kind of, I think this topic is so important, not just because of recent events, but just in general. It's been something that we just all need to talk about, and we all need to, just get comfortable with speaking about and helping people that are in the situation. So I wanted to come. Most don't know this, but I actually worked in mental health for about 8 years, and I taught the domestic violence offender class for the state of North Carolina for several years ago, before my current life. And I wanted to kind of speak about that from the offender perspective, because I think sometimes we say, like, what is it going to take for an abuser to realize they're an abuser? Like, how do we change them? And one of the things that I found with teaching these individuals is that it's almost not until they are caught, it's not until they are like put in a situation where they're at a rock bottom situation. So this particular program that I taught was called Resolve, and it's in the state of North Carolina. I don't know about any other states, but this was in Cumberland County, and they had a program called Resolve, and it was a 16-week program. So if you were arrested for a domestic violence offense, you can voluntarily take this program, and it's 16 weeks. And if you complete the program, and if I passed you, you would be able to, you'll be able to get that, that charge will be dropped, or there's a bunch of different criminal things that happen, but it's a good thing for you to take the class. And a part of that program, we showed a lot of videos. We brought in women that were victims of abuse. They had to stand up and they had to literally verbalize exactly what they did to the person that they abused. They had to talk about their own abuse. I would say about 98% of the people that came to my particular class were victims of abuse, and not in, oh, my mom beat me as a child when I stole something, but real difficult abuse to deal with, and it just spiraled out of control. A lot of them were also addicted to drugs and or alcohol, or didn't even realize that it was this addiction. They wasn't even at the level where they acknowledged there was this addiction, that when they drunk they got violent. So it's from the offender perspective, and I just found that once they're at a place where they're ready to listen and learn, they can, we don't throw them away. That's what I learned. They can change and they can be better people. But my experience is that it requires a level of hitting that rock bottom, getting arrested. Some things happen that will provoke them or encourage them or motivate them to change their behaviors. And this is some powerful stuff to watch these men. And there were also women that we taught as well, to watch them listen to somebody that's been through a similar situation that they put someone through, and to see them come to a place of, oh my God, like I did the same thing. And I will share, just from a personal perspective, I know that when this is also very personal for me, because I went through a domestic violence relationship. And oddly enough, I have a master's degree in professional counseling from Liberty University. I taught the Resolve class. I work with offenders, and I was going home to deal with my own level of domestic violence. And it was so interesting that I could teach, I could educate myself, I can do all of these things, but it was quite difficult for even me as this educated person to leave the situation with my ex-husband and the whole 9 yards. And so it's definitely a process. And like Andrea?
Yeah, Andrea.
Earlier, it takes a level of you just getting tired and realizing that you want better and more for yourself. And, when you do, you'll make a way. Your way will come up. And I actually did something recently for the United Nations about domestic violence against women. So this is all recent. I produced a video for them. And one of the things that in producing that video and talking with the ladies there, we realized the video was about the help that is available. And there's so much help, as I was doing my research, even from, I used to work in this space 6-7 years ago, and the amount of resources that are now currently available in comparison to even 6-7 years ago is massive. So even if you have a friend or you don't know, like there's so many resources, it's just about tapping kind of into them and getting the help. So I just wanted to communicate about that program, because I don't know if people really know that there are these structured programs for abusers and for offenders. And like I said, it took the people I taught to get arrested for them to come. But I that class, the recidivism rate as far as them returning to jail for a similar crime was lower when they went through this program. So there is hope, and that's kind of what I wanted to spill out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then it kind of goes back to what I was sharing about a case study that I had, that it took for that person, you know, to be arrested in order for them to be caught in that moment, to be set to say, okay, there's something wrong, right? And they themselves had to enter into an offender program as well too, and you know, simultaneously work with doing some individual counseling as well.
So I know that there are some guys in the room other than Spicy.
Okay.
Does any of the gentlemen in the room want to say anything at all? You could go ahead. You could unmute yourself. FDNY. Go ahead.
How are you? Oh, my voice is losing. Good evening. I think the basis is on a relationship. You know, you have to have a healthy relationship with the other man first, because character determines approach. You can't just wait till that person is in a hot zone to approach them. Sometimes it's best for them to see what's going on, step back and say, yo, bro, I mean, I've seen you being very, very handsy with your partner. What's really going on? Because that's not you. So then you open up the door to find out what's really going on. And sometimes some people that are happy in misery. So instead of being alone, they rather put themselves in a toxic relationship because they haven't gotten over their past relationship. And sometimes you have to look at the big picture of how did they grow up? You know, no man in the house, so they had to do everything. So they didn't have that opportunity to be a child. So now they're going into another responsibility of being in a relationship, and they have no clue because they have no foundation or blueprint on how to conduct themselves. So they're using their childish ways to satisfy their partner, and they think that when it's confrontation, okay, it's time to throw hands. And that's the approach that, you know, becomes normal. And like I said, we've lost that community of it takes a village, because when you hear people yelling, you hear someone knocking, hey, what's going on over there? Well, what's all this commotion? Nobody does that anymore. Everybody stays in quiet. Like, I'm not getting involved. I don't want to get involved because it's not, I don't want this and that. But for an abuser or a victim, you have to make them uncomfortable, because when you take someone out their comfort zone, they don't know how to act. So now you get to see the real person. And once you see the real person, then the door is open. If you're afraid to come outside of your comfort zone of helping someone, then you're not really dissolving the issue. You're standing back and saying, okay, this is not my area. But it's the human aspect that we have to realize that we have to get involved, because we're seeing too many murder suicides on a constant basis, and that's becoming a norm. You know, the foundation for a relationship is being transparent at the beginning, saying, hey, you know, I know you like me and everything, but I'm not ready for a relationship. Sometimes you have to step out of what you want and what you need. And so, you know what, I need to work on me first before I bring somebody else into my life. We're so busy wanting to keep up with everybody else. Oh, I'm in a relationship. Oh, I'm in a relationship. Sometimes you're in an unhealthy relationship just so you can say you're in a relationship. And that doesn't help anybody. So what's the point of suffering in silence while you could be happy and single? That's all I gotta say. And you know, hopefully we get past this uncomfortness of being, you know, alone, because sometimes you need to be alone, because sometimes you're toxic yourself. You're giving off all this toxic fumes, but you don't see it. It's like, you know, you're on the train and you like, oh my God, I ain't have no deodorant, and you smell it. But then it's not till people get closer to you, then you're like, oh my God, that same aroma. That's how some people present themselves. And that's all I have to say.
I think it was important, you know, one of the hardest things that also comes around is people actually being by themselves, like you said, right? But, you know, even with entering into the relationship, when whoever is the abuser in the relationship, they don't typically present that way in the beginning. right? So they present a different way, and then slowly over time, we start to see the development of the behaviors. There's a slight change in attitude or moods or possessiveness. So it would be nice sometimes just to be able to have that crystal ball and be able to see what we're getting. But, you know, we do have to take what we receive in the beginning for at face value and hope that people would allow themselves to be as transparent. But we do typically see that when there is development of domestic abuse in relationships, you know, they're not presented with it up front. There's people who would be in relationships the whole time that they're dating, and they've never experienced any type of abuse. And then they get married, and then all of a sudden they're in this abusive relationship. So, you know, but what I do like is that, you know, like you said, being able to recognize that when you're not in a healthy position, a healthy relationship, or identifying what a toxic relationship is. And it goes back to that initial question of, do I even understand? Do I have the resources? And resources meaning coming from your own personal background, your own personal experience, your own environment, your own, you know, social exposure with your partners in your life, to even say that you understand what a healthy and untoxic relationship is. And a lot of people aren't even aware of what that may entails.
Spicy, would you like to say anything?
Just basically that, you know, this whole conversation came about from a vibe that I had. It was a Saturday morning, and so many things were going on. It's the pandemic, it's domestic violence playing out right in front of us, and I was like, a stop needs to be put to this. The community needs help, right? So I made a post, Andrea and a whole heap of people responded to it, and you know, my goal with this is just to help someone, at least one person. You know, I'm not a professional, so I turn it over to the real professionals that do this. Ask me about music, I can help you out. Computers, the mind, still working on it.
You know, when I saw your post, but you know, you also bring up another important factor. I think that even the exposure of what came up in recent events, you know, there is a real thing called secondary trauma. And secondary trauma is when we ourselves see someone else who's been in a traumatic situation and have exposure to it nonstop, consistently, over and over. And so when you even see a situation like this for someone who may be experiencing any type of, you know, domestic violence, again, male or female, and seeing this play out on social media, that this can be triggerful for people, and this can, you know, create even an enormous amount of fear on top of what they have. Not even to throw in there the fact of the rise of domestic violence and substance use or mental health illness throughout this whole COVID and pandemic that we see, that even adds to just the likelihood of there being a development or increase in domestic violence. So I think that we also have to understand that by you doing this and creating the platform where, you know, we can, you know, talk about it, whether it's receiving information, you know, chiming in, sharing a story, asking questions, that this is how we start on just even the smallest level of bringing about that change. Because it does take more than one person to create the dialogue, the conversation, and to, again, in this sense, normalize the platform. We have to make this a safe space where, you know, we can bring these difficult topic, you know, any events that we see on social media platform, in the news, and be able to talk about it, not only, on a worldwide approach, but even more so in our community, because if we don't talk about it, it's just going to continue to go unheard. It's going to continue to be seen, but no one is going to talk about it. So being able to put a voice to whatever the trauma is, to whatever the disorder is, to whatever the experience is, becomes one of the most important steps that we can do as a community. And taking a look at ourselves, as well as how we play our role in our community, to our younger generations, to our older generations, and just being able to put a voice to that, and allowing us to normalize it in a positive way, and making it known that it's okay to talk about these type of conversations.
There was a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jody.
I just wanted to say, because I know there's a conversation about, men and men kind of holding other men responsible and accountable. And it's just so interesting. Like I can, when I was going through the situation, everyone thought that my ex was a saint. I mean, he was funny, he was charismatic, he was, everything that I guess everybody liked, So I remember a specific time I had been telling a friend of his that abuse was going on, and this guy did not believe me. I swear he did not believe me. I was telling, a number of people, no one thought that he was doing this to me. They thought he painted me like I was the crazy one. And it was not till we had a get together at my home. This is when it escalated, because he had never put his hands on me in front of people. And we had a get together at my home in Florida. And I had caught him writing this letter to this other woman, whatever. Anyway, caught him doing something. I literally just put the letter on the table, and I walked. This is a true story. I walked out the house, didn't say nothing to this man. I just walked out the house. He picks up the letter, realizes that he was caught with whatever he was doing, and he comes after me. This is with like 6 people in my home. And he says, oh, I guess you're gonna, you think you caught me, you're gonna go out and cheat or something, he said. He's now projecting it on me like I'm doing something wrong. When I turned around, he grabbed me by my throat and choke slammed me outside of our home, and picked me up and proceeded to choke slam me 2 more times. This is with people at my home, the same people that did not believe me. And then finally, this one particular guy ran outside when he figured out what was going on. He grabbed him. This is the same person. And I remember looking at him and I said, I told you. And I just ran off in complete tears and didn't come back to the house. He had to leave, called the police, the whole 9 yards. And it's so often that for some reason, abusers are not walking around with their fists balled up and they're, looking angry. Like they look normal, they're happy, they're everyone likes them, they're the funny guy, that's my bud, and it took them physically seeing him and the aggression for them to react and to help me, and I found, like, even throughout the relationship, with the cheating and all that stuff, like his frat brothers kind of knew it all. And I've had, even his frat brothers would come up to me and say, and I would say, can you talk to him? Can you just, help him? And they would say, they would say stuff like that. Excuse my friends. They'd be like, we don't F with him like that. We don't fuck with him like that. You just need to leave him alone. Like they knew it was happening, and they would just kind of write him off and just tell me to leave him alone too. But they didn't want to like physically help or talk to him, or they just wrote him off. And to this day, a lot of them are not friends with him. They don't associate with him, but I wanted them to physically say something and hold him accountable. But no male around me would physically say something, but I would say they all distanced themselves or completely separated themselves from him. So that was my experience with this. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
Oh, thank you for sharing. And it goes back even to what I think someone asked this earlier about that platform that men can go to and talk to, but again, being able to step in. And a lot of times it usually take exactly like what you said, for them to actually physically see or witness the abuse, the act happening to step in. And that's the unfortunate part that also can contribute to the victim just being in fear that no one is going to believe them, that there's nothing that they can do, that there's nowhere they can go or talk to. Because when I try to share my story or say something, an experience like that can happen, and it's, who's going to believe me? I'm stuck here, right? So until, again, that being caught in the act, or you know, being able to or show, right, the actual bruises, which 9 times out of 10 of there's bruises that the abuser is going to keep you even more isolated from being around people to kind of see the bruises that you have. But unless that's seen, your story isn't believable. And if no one is going to believe me, then how do I exit a relationship that is so damaging and toxic and hurting me? And that's where the struggle can come in with feeling stuck, staying in a relationship longer than, you know, one wants to or needs to, and just not understanding how to find an out or having those resources at their hands.
Thank you so much for that, Jody. We did have a question earlier from Tony. But what happens when you try to help and they, I'm sorry, I have to move my screen a little, and they tell you they don't want it and fight you? What happens in that type of situation?
You can only just continue to offer the fact that you are there when they're all ready to get the help, because it really comes down, remember, as I said earlier on, that sometimes if we try to bring the actual act directly to them, they may go into a defensive and protective stance versus an acceptant one, right? For whatever psychological damage may have happen through their conditioning or believing that if they say something, no one is ever going to believe them. You know, there's a lot of manipulation and a lot of conditioning that happens in abusive relationships. So if you do find yourself in that situation, you can only just continue to offer yourself as a resource and support for them for whenever they're ready. And just, again, point out what you notice or what it is that you do see that is different, whether it's a change in their behavior, sometimes it's a change in their tone, their change or ability to look at people directly, because they may feel so much guilt or shame that they may not even look at someone in their face or in their eyes anymore. But just letting them know that you see a difference, and that when they're ready to talk or ready to make a difference, that you would be there. And the one thing I always say is never offer yourself to be available if you know you can't be available. So if you can't be that person available, then make sure you're giving them the resources that can be available, because the worst thing you want to happen is that someone finally gets the courage and the strength to reach out and you're not available like you said you would be. So I think that's one of the things, but that's the only thing you can do. It's similar to someone who's dealing with addiction issues. You can try to get them into treatment, into therapy. You can even take them there yourself. But if they're not ready to accept the fact that there needs to be a change, or that there needs to be a treatment that's done, you know, they'll walk away from it and walk right back into the environment that was toxic and damaging for them until they hit their rock bottom. So it's kind of similar in this sense, where all you can do is just continue to offer the resource and the support, and let them know that you love them, and let them know that there is help available. I think that's one of the more important things, is to fill them with external love and support, so that they do know that if they walk away, that the only feeling of love and support that they have isn't only from the relationship that is causing them hurt and pain.
This was very informative, and we again want to thank everybody who is here. I kind of took over because Spice is in the other room doing some work on the side too. So
No problem. Busy guy.
Yeah, he's working. I don't know how much more time everyone has, but I know we would probably want to do this again. But I, really want to thank everybody who joined us tonight. This was very informative. I don't know can you repeat the number again that you had given to us earlier?
Sure. So the number, because I always like to make sure it's right. The number is 1-800. It's 799-7233, and that spells out SAFE. So 799 space. And that's the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything that they want to share or anything else that they would like to say? Because we're probably going to try to wrap it up. I know some people have work tomorrow.
I do like what Jody just put into the comment, and you're absolutely right. There is no shame. There's definitely, I think that's one of the biggest things. There's a lot of guilt and shame that people feel. And again, I thank you, thanks Spice, just for making this platform, because it makes it one step closer to saying, you know what, I can talk about this in a community of people and not feel judged or feel any guilt or shame riddled for it. And I do hope that we're able to continue. And of course, you know, of course, anyone ever have questions or a discussion style, I'm always good for a good, open for a good discussion. But I do believe that creating the platform just to even educate ourselves becomes one of the first steps in order to help those, in order to have those healthy discussions in the future.
Do you have a Instagram or a website that anyone can probably reach you?
Yeah, so my I know it's tagged on the post that was shared. So that's my Instagram. So it's CA Clinical and Consulting. So for Connell and Associates Clinical and Consulting.
Okay.
So it's actually tagged, Spice
On
actually tagged it on
post.
it.
Yeah, I'm gonna post it in the chat room.
Can I say something?
You sure can.
Domestic violence just not only happens in the home, it happens in the street as well. So if you have a victim that feels uncomfortable going home, if they see a police car or ambulance or a firehouse or a precinct, that they could go there and let them know instead of going home with that person.
I'll be right there.
For them to be safe, then go into an environment where they feel very unsafe. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for that. So again, really, we thank you all for doing this tonight. And we appreciate everyone who was here, even if you didn't say anything and you felt like you wanted to just listen. Know that if we do this again, you can share your story. You can share it privately with me, and I can get that over to, am I saying your name right, Andrea?
Yep.
Okay, I can share it with Andrea if you want to be anonymous, but please know that this is a safe space, as we said when we first started. Just feel free to talk about it. Don't think that you have to hide what is happening to you now, if it is. I know COVID has a lot of people staying home and not really going out anywhere, but just feel free to talk with us. Even if you send TeamSoca a DM and say, when are you going to have this again, just feel free to reach out to any one of us. Again, thank you. Spice, you want to say anything before you get off? Because I know you got to go.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone that's on here, because this was needed for everyone. Domestic violence, the pandemic, people are locked in their house, and some people go out, some people don't. So I just wanted to have this platform for you guys to be able to share, get educated, be able to help out someone, and live in love. 'Tis the season, all right? So
he's so cute.
I wanna
thank you for having me, Spice.
Happy holidays, Andrea. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anytime. Thank you for having me. And I'm available whenever, so just let me know.
You guys are
Thank
very
you,
welcome.
ladies. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you, guys.
You guys have a happy holidays. Keep it locked to TeamSoca.com. We got some surprises coming up. Big up to my Uber Soca Cruise family.
Yay, Jody.
Yay. Thank you, guys. This was very, very nice. Very needed and very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, everyone have a good night and happy holidays. As Spice said, keep it tuned to TeamSoca.com.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.
Night.
Night.